What's up, everybody? I'm back again with another video. I was, thinking about what to do this week, make a video on, and it just kind of came to my mind that I haven't really explained exactly what occultism is, and I've kind of called it out and been like, stay away from this stuff, but I haven't actually shown what it looks like. And so I think today is a good day to take a look at what it looks like in society as a whole and just kind of see what it actually is and what it looks like in your everyday life when you're going about your business. So today that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look and I'm going to show you, what that does look like. That way when you are going about your business and going about your day, you can just see and point out, okay, that's what that is and that's what that means, and be aware and have discernment in your everyday life instead of just not really understanding, what this stuff actually is or what it actually encompasses. So I just wanted to show this article from 2018, and it's talking about how there's a number of witches dramatically rising amongst the millennials in the U.S. and rejecting Christianity, which, whatever. But just the rise of number of witches, and this is 2018, so this is 4 years ago. And I think if you look around now, it's even more common than it was back then. But they talk a little bit about the practices here. So we have astrology, tarot cards, Wicca religious rituals, which would just kind of encompass, certain spells, certain practices such as, like combining different plants and things in order to do a spell or in order to rid spirits in your home or something like that. You have quartz and crystals, things like that, which I don't think that's what that is. That's actually a a news outlet, but that's also part of the same thing as, the whole idea that crystals give you this energy and get rid of spirits or promote this and that. So that's just kind of what it looks like. Again, all this is kind of a result of people wanting to, get rid of religious norms and religious structure, and right here it says freedom in their spirituality. So that's kind of the idea here, is freedom, and that is the underlying figure amongst the Antichrist spirit, and the idea of most of these occult beliefs is based on this idea of freedom in spirit, of liberating themselves from their earthly bodies into a higher form of consciousness or enlightenment. So I just kind of wanted to show that about, this is on the rise, or was on the rise 4 years ago. So imagine now what it looks like, right? So astrology, that article talked about astrology. So we can go into astrology. Astrology is something that is just very, very predominant in society, very popular. A lot of people get into it. A lot of people find their identity, make decisions based on this stuff, which again is just problematic. It talks about here, in astrology, we can understand and anticipate life and all it entails, right? So they're looking at the stars and trying to find information, get knowledge from the stars. Very, very similar to any other practice, because all this entails seeking out some sort of knowledge, higher spiritual knowledge from, observing things around us, from entities, from whatever, right? But so astrology is looking at the stars and the heavenly bodies, the luminaries, and, trying to get some sort of information, maybe a form of, anticipating life here is looking into the future, trying to see what's going to happen in our reality. So again, it's just sort of the same idea of seeking out, the knowledge of good and evil, so to speak. I'm not sure if I have that verse pulled up. Yes. So what God says to astrologers and things like that here is talking about Isaiah 47, talking about the doom of Babylon. And again, Babylon is under judgment for doing these things biblically. And he's telling them, let now the astrologers and the stargazers stand up and save you from what is coming. You know what I mean? So he's mocking them, saying, let the people who interpret the stars and do all that, let those, go to them for salvation, because that's what you're seeking out. That's where you're finding information. That's where you're giving reverence to the stars and to the sky, for information and for I mean, ultimately, when you're getting information from something and you're observing something and looking at it as, you know, just this mystical, like spiritual thing, you're giving reverence to it. So it's you're enabling it to be, it's idolatry, because you're giving it a divine, divine characteristics, and you're looking for it for spiritual knowledge, which again would be idolatry, because if that's not the true God, then you're seeking out a false God. Even if it's not technically a God, you're still trying to find spiritual information from a source outside of the true God. So again, that's the problem with astrology. Astronomy is also similar. It's more of the scientific aspect of things. People would look at astronomy as being okay and astrology not, because astronomy is more of a scientific practice. But here it talks about how it has a lot of overlap, and all of it just comes from observing things and trying to get signs and information from the stars. So again, when you find your identity in this, and you really seek out that knowledge, you're giving reverence to that, and that's just problematic. But again, it's just popular in society, so I just wanted to show what it looks like. Here's another article talking about astrology. Again, this is 2018, but it's more talking about the occult and everything associated with it. Offers a sense of control when everything else feels out of whack. So that's why people go to this stuff. This is why it's so prominent now, because it's not something that's scary or, dark and evil. It offers a sense of control, and it helps you feel like you're in control of your spirituality. So that's why people really seek this out and find, their identity with this. So yeah, I just wanted to show that, occult is a broad term, which for purposes I'm using to encompass greater mystical practices, tarot, astrology, numerology, spell work, palmistry, mediumship, and other divinations. So again, this is just a very broad thing. But again, here she talks about, crystals, healing crystals, magic, stargazing, as we just mentioned, things like that. But it's just occultism. That's what it is. It's seeking knowledge and information from the creation, right? It's looking at creation and giving creation a reverence instead of giving God that reverence. We should be seeking that information, that spiritual knowledge from Christ, from the one true God, because he is truth. So anything outside of that, you're going to be falling into, deception. And again, it says the occult enables us to adjust our internal compass, directing our gaze inwards and upwards. So again, it's not even really worship of these things, right? It's worship of ourself, inward worship of, I'm going to use all these things for my own spirituality. So it's a very selfish form of spirituality, which we'll get into later. But also, astrology is just a big business. That's what I wanted to show, a $40 million business for apps. So again, like I said, it comes from the top down. The occultic worldview comes from the top down. So if it's influenced and just fluid throughout society, you can know it's coming from the top. And this is just showing that, look, people in business and industries at the top, are profiting off of this stuff. So obviously they got to be promoting it, right? And through promotion, you're supporting and falling into the same thing. So yeah, meditation. We're going to just jump right into meditation. I'm just going to be jumping around because, there's a lot of this stuff, and I just got to show you what it looks like. Meditation is one of those things that, again, it's promoted as being healthy, as being beneficial for you and for your body. Science kind of, promotes it as, oh, it's a good thing to do. It's a good practice. But this article here has 9 million views. 92% of readers find it very helpful. So it's just something that's very popular. People are seeking out and trying to figure out how to do. But again, it encompasses a lot of things, such as, your breathing techniques, being mindful. But if you go here, again, this meditation as a practice is rooted in Eastern mysticism and Indian mysticism from that part of the world. And so ultimately you're going to find Eastern and Indian philosophy fluid throughout, you know, the practice and how to do the practice. And again, that's the issue, because it's a different spiritual philosophy. It's not based on truth and biblical things. Or if it kind of is, it's a twist of those things. So here, again, there's telling, how to meditate. So repeat a mantra, and some good mantras they include are one, peace, calm, tranquil, and silence. So again, this idea of oneness and peace, that's very much part of the whole liberation for yourselves, for your spirit, liberate your spirit. And unity is amongst that idea that humanity as a whole can come together and unite under a single spiritual ideology or philosophy, and free itself from its oppressors and from a lower state of being. And then here it says you can use the word om, which you heard om, right? Like that's a meditative thing, but it symbolizes omnipresent consciousness. So again, giving reverence to a part of the human existence, part of us as human beings, giving reverence to our consciousness as if our consciousness is where divinity lies. It's the same idea. So that's the issue with meditation as well, because again, the more you get into stuff, the more you will get into Indian philosophy and Eastern mysticism, and it can just be spiritually harmful, especially when you don't know what you're doing. So if we go here, what meditation actually does is, I think it slows your brain waves and puts you into an alpha state of consciousness, which is just a different state of consciousness. It's the state of consciousness that they here say it's indicative of relaxing and reflecting. So it's a reflective state. So it's not the same as beta consciousness. Beta consciousness is when you're in a surface level consciousness. Is the consciousness we live in as we go about our business, right? Our minds are the most alert, which is very important to understand, because through meditation you go deeper within consciousness, and so you become less and less alert of your surroundings. And I think this is just totally anti-biblical, as in, the Bible says to be alert because Satan roams around like a lion, ready to pounce on people. So when you go into meditation, you do these things, you're not alert. You're actually dulling your senses and descending into your consciousness. And the issue actually is, the more that becomes a practice and the less you stem away from beta consciousness, the more likely you are to not really return to a full level of beta consciousness. And also, some people live in a more alpha state of consciousness, and they're just more reflective people, and they're kind of always in a more observatory state mentally. And so if you're one of those and you get into meditation, excuse me, you get into meditation, you're going to keep descending down, and it's really going to make being alert and being aware and being in beta consciousness way harder, because you already have a hard time naturally being in that state. So again, it's just problematic, and a lot of people wouldn't know anything about your brain waves and beta, alpha, delta, theta, and those forms of consciousness. Nobody really knows stuff like that. But it's just problematic because, again, a lot of us don't know these things. It's just a practice that we would do because we think it's helpful or beneficial. But it's an issue, because the less alert you become, the more likely you are to be susceptible to spiritual attacks. If you think about, again, theta is a state where you're like, sleep, a dream-like state, or I think it might be delta, one of the two. Just a deeper state is what we go through as we're sleeping and dreaming and things like that. And a lot of that stuff is very much connected to the spiritual realm. A lot of people, experience demonic attacks while they sleep. And, there's just a lot of spiritual things that go on in that form of consciousness. So to induce yourself purposely into these deeper levels of consciousness, you're just opening yourself up instead of being alert and being aware and being on guard of spiritual attack. You're actually just opening yourself up to these things. So again, something I would just not recommend doing, because they say consciously controlling our brainwaves is a step toward healthy living. But I say being more alert and aware of your surroundings and sharpening your tools of discernment will help you live healthily, because you can look around and know what's good and bad for your spirit. Because again, we have the Holy Spirit, and it's not hard to understand those things. So just, I wouldn't recommend meditation because it's involved in Eastern and Indian philosophy, which is occultic, and again promotes the same sort of spirituality as liberating your, here it says, all of them focusing on the goal of liberation an individual from dukkha, which is suffering, pain. Again, this idea of this lower state of consciousness, lower state of being, where we experience, earthly things, earthly struggles, earthly tribulation, and liberate us from that into a higher state of consciousness, into a heaven-like divinity type state. And again, this is not something that is actually even really achievable. It just opens yourself up to possession, because again, the way they try to achieve it is through opening themselves up. So the more open you become, and the more you subject your conscious into a very deep state where you're not actually aware of your body and anything like that, you're not in control in those areas. And there have been many people who have been susceptible to attack spiritually and not been able to control things that go on. I've even heard of just, sexual things go on in these realms, because there are entities that lie within these realms. Because again, the deeper you go into consciousness, the more you get away from surface level consciousness, and what we are aware of in beta consciousness is totally different than what we're aware of in a deeper level of consciousness. So again, we're not in control of those deeper spiritual realms. We are in control to some aspect of our day-to-day life. But when you don't have a body, right, and you go into a deep form of consciousness, and your body is no longer an aspect, and it's just consciousness, it's just this, awareness that you have, the same rules don't apply as they do here. So you're opening yourself up to attacks, and people have been attacked. And so again, it's just a warning. But again, it's the same goal of liberation from the lower state of being into achieving higher consciousness. And it's the same with yoga. So here it talks about yoga being rooted in Indian philosophy. It began as a spiritual practice. So again, if it began as that and it's rooted in that, it can never be separated from that. Again, if it's the root of something, think about a seed, a fruit seed. The fruit that is produced from the seed they're intertwined, right? It can't be the fruit without the seed. So again, yoga can't be yoga without Indian philosophy, because Indian philosophy is where yoga stems from. So people who believe in Indian philosophy, right, and believe in liberating their consciousness and getting into a higher form of consciousness, through that belief, they developed yoga and meditation and doing these practices. That's where they actually come from. So you may think, oh, well, we can just separate ourselves from that, and I'm just going to stretch and do these whatever. But that's what it's rooted in. So again, it's going to be problematic, and open yourself up. And again, the more you dive into it, the more likely you are to fall into the philosophy, because they're intertwined. So if yoga is part of your daily life and meditation are part of your daily life, when you want to further it, because again, that's what practices do, right? You want to go deeper. Oh, I'm already been doing yoga, whatever, I'm getting good at it, but I want to take it a little further. Well, you're going to fall into Indian philosophy and through these doctrines, because it's deeply intertwined with it. You're going to fall into a different, deeper form of yoga that's even more spiritual and even more dangerous than just regular, oh, I'm just stretching yoga. So again, they're intertwined. So they can never be separated. It is a byproduct of the philosophy. And so I also just wanted to show, pop culture examples, or just modern societal examples. Clothes are always, nowadays, very, very obvious. It's promoting the same spirituality. It's how you know that, at the top level, they believe this stuff, because again, it's all through every facet of society. And so, I pulled up a couple t-shirts here, and we're just going to look at the messages and things portrayed on the shirts and see how it falls exactly in line with the same idea of lower level of consciousness and raising yourself to a higher state, or recreating a heaven-like state, or entering into a heaven-like state. So the idea is uniting as humanity to liberate ourselves from our current state into a heaven-like divine state. That's the occultic worldview. That's the that's the lie told in the Garden of Eden: ye shall be as gods. So again, we're just going to look, and I'll show you how that philosophy is on the shirts, in the music, whatever, right? So the shirt says on the front, "Pursue Paradise." And if we take a look here, again, it's all around this. So what's really interesting to me is the fruit. Because again, what does fruit have to do with pursuing paradise? Just ask yourself that question. Because when I think of Genesis 3 and what the serpent said to Eve, she ate of the fruit. So you have the same theology being promoted on this t-shirt as well as fruit. Makes you wonder. But at the bottom it says, "A state of perfect happiness, bliss, no drama, no weight, no wants. The future is unknown. Let us shape a collective happiness, worldwide collaboration, unlimited potential." Again, collaboration, unity, shaping a collective happiness, a state of perfect bliss. So again, unifying and creating a heaven-like state. Again, it's right here. Liberation from dukkha, which is a suffering and unhappiness, unsatisfactory state, which again we would all currently be living in, and entering into a state of nirvana here, right? Represents liberation, right, and freedom, and divinity in a heaven-like state. It puts us in the driver's seat of our spirituality and promotes our divinity, even though we're not divine. But that's the again the philosophy. So again, if you can explain to me what this fruit is and how that's how that connects to this outside of what I was just talking about, go for it. But that's just very bizarre to me. And so then we have another shirt here. Again, a yoga pose. It says root chakra. We'll open this image up so we can take a better look. Root chakra, the journey from within. Again, the journey from lower level to higher level. And then there's also stars and sort of astrological type idea around it. But again, it's just the same principles. Psychic readings. This one doesn't need an explanation, but it's just showing you, fortune telling, psychic readings, things of that nature. This one I did find interesting. So again, talking about entering into a heaven-like reality, whatever, right? This one right here is promoting the same idea. So a fantastic reality, enter, and you have waited, the time has come. So again, you have unity, harmony, a fantastic reality, and astrological signs, a butterfly, which represents the same idea of a caterpillar morphing into a butterfly, so being a lower level being into a very beautiful divine-like creature. Same thing. That's what that symbolizes. But it's the same principles, right? Being united, entering into a new reality, and the time has come. So this stuff to me is revealing spiritually, because I think we're getting to a time where they're about to I don't want to say reach it, because they're never going to really reach it, but to a time where we're going to be initiated as humanity into this new world or whatever, new age. And that's for another video. We can look at that some other time. But again, that's just kind of what that reminds me of. So again, just the same spiritual idea, philosophy. This one as well, it says, "Turn your back on the world. Don't ever look back, anywhere but here." And then again, you have this idea of going from a lower being and going higher, right? This would, to us, say being abducted by aliens, but esoterically, it's symbolizing the state of being, going from a lower level earthly conscious to a heaven-like divine consciousness. And again, turning your back on the world being the Indian philosophy, the dukkha, if that's how you pronounce that, but the suffering and unhappiness, right? And entering into, something more divine, something more liberating, so it's the same idea. So that's all I have for t-shirts, but I just wanted to show, because these t-shirts are, out there to buy, and this is just a few examples. There's so much more, and just the idea of unity and all those things is very prominent right now. And so then I'm going to go into music a little bit. This is the only example I have, because this is the one that came to mind, but this is a track by The Weeknd on his album. I think Dawn FM is the album name. And this is the first track of the album, and it's promoting the same thing. You have it here. "You've been in the dark way too long. It's time to walk into the light and accept your fate with open arms." Scared? Don't worry. We'll be there to hold your hand and guide you through this painless transition. So, right, we're going through a transition. They're trying to transition humanity from their lower state into their divine state. That's why their practices are being promoted and why the philosophy is intertwined with society, because they want everybody on the same agenda and pushing toward the same goal. And again, they're talking about they'll hold your hand and guide us through this transition. So what are they going to guide us into, right? They're guiding into a fantastic reality, right? And a new age, a new world. And so that's just what this stuff looks like, you know? It's very important to be aware of these things, because I think a lot of us, and a lot of times, we're not aware, and we don't know what that stuff means. We don't know why yoga is rooted in Indian philosophy. We don't even know what Indian philosophy is. We wouldn't see anything wrong with this stuff because it is popular and it is promoted, and so we would think, you know what, it's fine. But it's not fine. Spiritually, it's just very, very dangerous, very deceptive. You know, you have, Christian yoga here. And, I mean, this explains kind of where it comes from, things of that nature. But it was promoted by people in the New Thought movement, which, again, is the same idea of, it's a spiritual movement, but it's the same idea of, humanity kind of uniting under certain spiritual precepts and spiritual ideas. So it's just moving away from Christ and not rooted in Christ at all, and more toward the idea of liberation, liberating your spirit, right? Because it's very easily for this stuff to infiltrate the church, because they look at Christ and this philosophy, these philosophies, this occult philosophy doesn't just outright deny Christ. They say Christ was a figure who achieved enlightenment. That's what they believe. They believe that he is one of the examples of an enlightened being. Same as Buddha, same as certain spiritual leaders. I'm not sure who else. I just would say Buddha because I know Buddha is like the one in Buddhism. But excuse me. It's just they would attribute that to Christ, that he was, a lower human being and elevated himself into God. Well, no, Jesus came down as God. He didn't become a God. He was God. And the only way to be liberated from this, from our suffering, from our sin, is through his sacrifice. Had Christ just came down and then ascended, nothing would have happened for us. But he died and sacrificed himself so that we can be liberated. That's a totally different philosophy. So again, but they would just attribute that to Christ and totally take away Christ being God. And they would be like, he became God and showed you how to do that too. No. And so Christian yoga here, I just kind of want to talk about it for a minute. They say they follow Christ, and they say that they worship God and Jesus as the creator. But they just intertwine themselves with the practice of yoga, and they think, doing yoga isn't, they think they can separate the two, as I talked about earlier. And they think that they can worship God and unite with Christ through the practice of yoga here, yoking themselves, unifying. But God says in Deuteronomy 12:31 that you shouldn't worship the Lord in the same way that, he's talking about the pagan nations here. He's saying, don't worship me in that way. So he doesn't want to be worshipped like other gods are worshipped. And so if in Indian philosophy, they worship their gods and the deity of self, of consciousness, through yoga, God doesn't want to be worshipped that way. So we shouldn't do that, and we shouldn't worship him in that way. And I just think that's important to understand and realize. So don't be deceived into thinking it's okay just because, Christian yoga tells you it is, or your church does it, or whatever. Like, really dig into it and see what it's rooted in. And then meditation, because a lot of people go, well, meditation's in the Bible or whatever, right? Well, it certainly is, but it's definitely not sitting down and repeating a mantra in your mind, or, opening yourself up and lowering your consciousness. No, it's being in relationship with Christ and giving him reverence and, conversating with him and just being together with him, right? It's not a spiritual practice. Like, this is not something like if I'm going to pray, and talk to God and talk to Christ, I'm not going to sit down, get in a pose and, you know, do a breathing technique, whatever. Like, if I'm going to pray to God, I'm just going to do it just like I'm doing right now in this video. I'm going to talk to him just like this. I'm going to conversate with him just like this. Sometimes maybe, I do it in my head, but it's not some spiritual, like, super interesting mystical practice. Like, it's just prayer. Prayer is just conversation. It's not anything, more complex than that. Like, if you have the Holy Spirit within you, I can pray to the Lord right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not something I have to stop and set up and do, like, all this stuff. Like, no, you can just pray. It's not anything. And I think a lot of times the mystical practices go, oh, well, it's similar to prayer because you have to pray a certain way. No, you don't. Prayer is prayer, right? If I'm going to have a conversation with someone I have a relationship with, I'm going to have a conversation. I don't have to do anything special, right? Same with the Lord. Not taken away from how amazing God really is, but how simple he makes it for us to be in relationship with him. He doesn't tell you have to go do all these things in order to talk to me. Like, you just come to the Father, right? Come humble and speak to him, right? So again, it's talking about meditating, on the laws of the Lord, right? Thinking about his laws, right? Meditation of your heart. This is meditation of the mind. This isn't of the heart. Meditation of the heart is a heart posture. It's totally, totally different than, this changing your consciousness level. It's just not the same thing. It's not what they're talking about. So if you do want to meditate, follow the biblical outline of pondering and thinking about Christ and his character and his laws and his truth, and find your peace here. Don't find your peace in Eastern mystic practices. I guess I'll just briefly talk about chakras as well. Again, this is like the same stuff, Eastern mysticism, but each chakra is a level of consciousness. So you would go from the base level, beta consciousness, up into a deeper level of consciousness, which would be awakening your third eye or whatever. But it's the same idea of, being in a low state, going into a higher state. I think it's interesting here because this guy talks about the chakras, and he says in Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, it's just similar principles of liberation through spiritual practice. But an individual who's all chakra, I think they spelled that wrong, but basically an individual who is, awakened all their chakras would be called the Messiah. So again, they would tie Christ into this figure of an individual who awakened all their chakras. That's not what Christ did. Like, Christ was already God when he came down. He didn't have to enter into that state. So again, but this idea, if awakening all your chakras makes you the Messiah, and individuals can actually reach a state of awakening all their chakras, we can become like Christ. We can become a Messiah. We can become godlike. Just a very, very different philosophy, and a very deceptive philosophy, and something we need to be aware of. So that's all I had today. I just really wanted to show that. I wanted to, kind of outline what it actually looks like in society, and, give you an idea of what occultism is, what it entails, because all these practices root from the same philosophy. So if they root from it, right, they're all tied up to it. You don't get witchcraft without the idea that we can liberate our spirit, and that there's this power that we can use to do that. You don't get yoga if you don't get the same, if you don't have the same thing, right? Without that philosophy, none of these practices exist. So by default, that's what they're rooted in, and that's what they're based on. So just be aware, be alert. Don't jump into something that you don't understand. Just be mindful. Again, I'm not here to condemn anybody who does any of this stuff. I just want to raise awareness and show what it's rooted in, and what it actually entails and what it looks like, so you can, maybe reconsider and really research, what practices we're doing, and the effects they have, right? So that's all I have. Just be mindful, be aware, stay in prayer. Again, if you're not a believer, and you look at this and you go, well, I don't agree with Christ and whatever, just, take the time to consider. Look at the philosophy I'm talking about here, and, compare, to biblical principles and things like that. Because again, this stuff, this philosophy, and this is just the key point to make here. All this is selfish and self-focused because you have to focus on yourself to achieve this liberation. So it's all about you, right? You're divine. It's you. You're the one that can enter into a divine state, and you can become like God. But there's no relationship here with anything. So it's spiritual isolation is what it is. What Christ calls us to is to spiritual relationship with him and going to him for, a spiritual relationship, for a spiritual experience is with Christ, being unified with him, entering into his presence, into his sacrifice, right? Accepting him as God and accepting his sacrifice for our sins in order to become, a son of God, and to receive his spirit. And through that, you get your spirituality, and that's where you find your identity. And as a result, it changes your life and changes your heart and makes you more loving and makes you. And so if you don't believe in that, right, and you've seen, people who say they're Christians and whatnot, and they've just not been that example, first off, I want to apologize on their behalf, because again, Christianity is about following Christ and being like him. And so I think there's a lot of examples of, people not being like Christ and condemning. So again, I'm not here to condemn you if you're not a believer. That's not what I'm here to do. But I am here to warn, because I don't want you to engage in a practice and try to find your identity and your spirituality in something that may be harmful to you. And so I just want you to look into something and research something and be aware, because I promise that people who represent Christ, they're not perfect, right? So they can't ever be Christ. We just try. But Christ himself is a whole different ballgame than any of this religious stuff you can get into. And his presence doesn't compare to, changing your consciousness level and doing all these things to become enlightened. That is a works based. You have to do all these things to be enlightened. Christ says it's simple. Accept me, who I am, and accept me as the truth, because he is the truth. And you're saved and you're liberated. There's no process of liberation. It's believe and you are now liberated, and allow him to change you. So, and you have a relationship. I can't stress enough the importance of a relationship, because it's so much different than again, this idea of spiritual isolation to reach this divine state. It's just so different, to have God and actually be able to conversate with God and have him point you in the right direction and have his word to lean on. And just that is so much different than having to do all these things, to spend money on tarot cards and spend money on sage and spend money on spell books and spend money on yoga class and a yoga mat, and I mean just astrology books, and looking into, just think the influx of information you have to go through to get all this information. It can just be enslaving, because you're just looking elsewhere. So find your freedom in Christ, because I promise it's free. First off, it's a free gift. It's not a works-based faith, and it's so simple. And that's the way God, if there really is a God, because there is, why would God make it difficult? Why would God make it hard for you to know him? That would be very unfair. Why would you have to go on a process to become like God? Why would you have to do that? That doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't it be as simple as just accepting who God is, accepting his sacrifice, and now getting to be in relationship with him, right? It's that simple, guys. So again, if you're not a believer, please just reconsider and pay attention to the things you're doing, and observe how this stuff is making you feel if you dive into this stuff. And if you are a believer, please just, stay away, because it's dangerous. And look into it. If you don't want to take my word for it, look into something before you do it. That's really my point. Anyways, that's all I have, guys. Thank you for watching if you make it to the end. I'll be back next week with another video, I'm sure. And I love you guys. And I'm out of here. Peace.